The wax had begun to smell like home, though Camille Lancaster wasn't entirely sure when that had happened. She dipped another wick into the molten tallow, her fingers steady despite the exhaustion creeping through her bones like winter frost through wooden floorboards. The small shop in Bodie, California smelled of beeswax and lavender, the two scents mingling in the September air of 1878 as the darkness pressed against her windows. She had 20 dozen candles to finish before the morning supply run to the mining camps, and she'd be damned if she disappointed her customers again. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving her this shop and a reputation for quality that she refused to let crumble. At 23 years old, Camille had discovered that grief and determination made strange bedfellows, pushing her through nights like this when her body begged for rest, and her mind wandered to softer futures that seemed increasingly impossible. The miners needed light. The saloons needed ambience. The churches needed their holy glow. And she needed to eat, to pay rent, to prove that a woman alone could make something of herself in this wild, unforgiving place where gold fever had turned reasonable men into gambling fools. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a small smudge of wax that she'd deal with later. The clock on the wall read 3:30 in the morning. Her back ached from standing, her feet throbbed in her worn boots, and her eyes burned from staring at flames for hours on end. But the rhythm soothed her somehow, the dipping and hanging, watching the candles grow fatter with each pass through the wax. The knock at her door startled her so badly she nearly dropped an entire rack of half-finished tapers. Nobody came calling at this hour unless something had gone terribly wrong. Bodie wasn't known for its safety after dark. The mining town attracted every variety of desperate soul, and desperation made people dangerous. She grabbed the iron poker from beside her workstation and approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" she called through the thick wood. "Name's Bennett Armstrong, madam. I saw your light burning and thought maybe you'd be willing to sell me some candles. I'm heading out on the trail at dawn and realized I'm fresh out." The voice was deep, tired, and held a politeness that surprised her. Camille hesitated, then slid back the bolt. A man stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, looking as exhausted as she felt. He was tall, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes that caught the candlelight from her shop in a way that made them seem almost amber. Dust covered his clothes, and she could see the outline of a gun at his hip, but his expression was gentle. "You know what time it is?" she asked, not moving from the doorway. "Yes, madam. I apologize for the intrusion. I wouldn't have bothered you except I saw you were already working and I truly am in need. I can pay double your usual price for the inconvenience." Something in his earnestness made her step aside. "Come in then. But make it quick. I have orders to fill." Bennett Armstrong entered her shop with the careful movements of someone accustomed to being in unfamiliar spaces. He looked around at the hundreds of candles in various stages of completion, at her work tables covered in wax drippings and tools, at the large pots of melted wax still heating over low flames. "You make all these yourself?" "Every single one," Camille said, a note of pride creeping into her voice despite her exhaustion. "My father taught me the trade. Now it's just me." He turned to look at her more directly, and she became suddenly aware of how she must appear, covered in wax and soot, her dark hair falling from its pins, her apron stained and worn. But if he judged her appearance, it didn't show in his face. Instead, he looked at her with something like respect. "That's impressive, madam, truly. I don't know many people who'd work through the night like this. Necessity makes us all do things we wouldn't choose otherwise," she said, moving back to her workstation. "How many candles do you need? A dozen should see me through." I'm taking a herd up through the mountains and the nights get dark up there." She selected 12 of her finished tapers, wrapped them carefully in brown paper, and tied the package with twine. "That'll be $2. He handed her 4 without hesitation. "Like I said, double for the inconvenience, and because anyone who works this hard deserves it." Camille stared at the coins in her hand, then back at him. "That's not necessary. Maybe not, but it's right." He took the package and settled his hat back on his head. "Thank you, Miss Lancaster. Camille Lancaster, Miss Lancaster." He nodded respectfully. "I hope the rest of your night goes smoothly." She expected him to leave then, but he paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You shouldn't be working alone like this at night. Bodie's not safe after dark." "I don't have much choice in the matter," she replied, bristling slightly at the implication that she didn't know her own situation. "I suppose that's true enough." He was quiet for a moment. "When I get back from this drive, would you allow me to bring you breakfast? Seems like someone who works through the night could use a sunrise and a hot meal." The question caught her completely off guard. Camille stood there, wax dripping slowly from the wick in her hand, staring at this stranger who just offered her something no one had in months: simple kindness with no strings attached. Or at least, she hoped there were no strings. "Why would you do that?" she asked carefully. Bennett Armstrong smiled then, a slow, genuine expression that transformed his tired face into something quite handsome. "Because I'd like to, and because I think you might say yes. I don't even know you. That's generally why people have breakfast together, madam, to get acquainted." Despite herself, despite the exhaustion and the work still ahead of her and every reasonable objection her mind could produce, Camille felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward. "When would you be back?" 3 weeks, give or take. Weather depending. "If you remember and if I'm not too busy, then yes, you can bring me breakfast." His smile widened. "I'll remember, Miss Lancaster. I promise you that." After he left, Camille stood in the silence of her shop, the coin still warm in her palm, wondering what had just happened. She returned to her work, but something had shifted in the night. The hours didn't feel quite so lonely anymore. She finished her orders as the sky began to lighten, and when she finally locked her shop and climbed the narrow stairs to her small apartment above, she found herself thinking not of sleep, but of 3 weeks from now. The days that followed fell into their usual pattern. Camille worked, filled orders, dealt with demanding customers and late payments, and the constant challenge of keeping her business afloat in a town where fortunes changed as quickly as the weather. But in the quiet moments, when her hands moved through familiar motions, her mind wandered to the cowboy with the tired eyes and the easy smile. She told herself she was being foolish, that he'd likely forgotten his promise before he'd even reached the edge of town. Men said things to women all the time that they didn't mean. But on the morning of the 21st day after their meeting, when Camille was pouring her first cup of coffee in the pre-dawn darkness, preparing for another long day, she heard a knock at her door. She opened it to find Bennett Armstrong standing there, looking sun-weathered and trail-worn, holding a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "I brought sunrise," he said simply. "And biscuits, eggs, bacon, and coffee that's probably not as good as what you already have brewing, but I made a promise." Camille realized she was staring. "You actually came back." "I said I would." He looked uncertain for the first time. "If this is a bad time, I can come back later." "Or not at all if you've changed your mind." "No," she said quickly, too quickly perhaps. "No, I haven't changed my mind. I'm just surprised. Come in." They ate breakfast at her small work table, which she'd cleared and wiped clean. The food was simple but good, and Camille couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for her. As they ate, Bennett told her about the cattle drive, about the mountain passes and the trouble they'd had with a few strays, and the stars at night when you got far enough from town that the darkness became absolute. "It's beautiful up there," he said. "Lonely, but beautiful. Makes you think about what matters." "What did you decide matters?" Camille asked, genuinely curious. He looked at her over his coffee cup. "Coming back, keeping promises, finding reasons to settle in one place instead of always moving on. You move around a lot." "I have. Been working cattle drives since I was 18. That's 7 years of moving from place to place, never setting down roots. It gets old after a while." He set down his cup. "What about you? Have you always been in Bodie?" "3 years now. We came from Sacramento after my mother died. My father thought a fresh start would help. Then he died too, and I found myself alone in a town that eats people up and spits them out without a second thought." She hadn't meant to say that last part, but the words came out anyway. "But you stayed." "I had nowhere else to go. And I wasn't about to let everything my father built just disappear. This shop, these candles, they mean something. They're proof that we were here, that we mattered." Bennett was quiet for a long moment. "That's brave." "It's not bravery when you don't have a choice." "I think it is. Bravery is doing the hard thing even when you're scared, even when you're alone. That's exactly what you're doing." Camille felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest at his words. People in Bodie saw her as a curiosity at best, a target at worst, a young woman alone and vulnerable. But Bennett Armstrong looked at her and saw strength. That meant more than she could easily express. They talked until the sun was fully up, until Camille realized she was late opening her shop, and Bennett admitted he needed to report to his employer about the successful drive. But before he left, he hesitated at the door again, just as he had that first night. "Would you allow me to call on you again?" he asked. "Properly, I mean. Take you to dinner, maybe walk with you in the evening when you're not working." "I'm almost always working," Camille said. "Then I'll come to you. I could help if you'd let me. I'm fairly handy and I learn quick." She laughed at that, the sound surprising her. "You want to make candles?" "I want to spend time with you, madam. If that means learning to make candles, then yes." Camille studied his face, looking for the angle, the ulterior motive. The thing that would reveal this was all some kind of game. But she saw only sincerity and a hope that mirrored something awakening in her own chest. "All right," she said. "Come by tomorrow evening. I'll teach you the basics." His face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I'll be here." True to his word, Bennett arrived the next evening just as the sun was setting, freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. Camille showed him how to prepare the wicks, how to test the temperature of the wax, how to dip and hang with a rhythm that became almost meditative once you mastered it. He was clumsy at first, his large hands struggling with the delicate work, but he paid attention and improved quickly. More than that, he made her laugh with his self-deprecating jokes and his honest appreciation for the craft. "My hands smell like beeswax," he said, sniffing them with mock horror. "I'll never get the other cowboys to take me seriously now." "The other cowboys can learn some culture," Camille shot back, grinning despite herself. They fell into an easy pattern over the following weeks. Bennett would arrive in the evenings, sometimes after a day of work at the nearby ranches, sometimes between jobs. He'd help her with her candle making, learning the trade with genuine interest, and they'd talk about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his own parents to cholera when he was young, about drifting west looking for something he couldn't quite name. She told him about her childhood in Sacramento, about her mother's garden and her father's patient teaching, about the loneliness that had become her constant companion since his death. But it wasn't all heavy conversation. Bennett had a gift for finding joy in small moments. He'd spin her around the workshop in an impromptu waltz when they'd finished a particularly large order. He'd bring her wildflowers he'd found on the trails. He'd read to her from the newspaper while she worked, doing silly voices for the advertisements that made her laugh until her sides ached. Bodie began to notice. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, the sight of Bennett Armstrong spending his evenings at the Lancaster candle shop became a subject of considerable interest. Some people thought it sweet. Others thought Camille was foolish to trust a drifter. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house, felt compelled to offer her opinion one afternoon when Camille was delivering candles. "You be careful with that cowboy," she said, her voice pitched low with concern. "Men like that, they're not made for settling. You'll give him your heart and he'll take it with him when he moves on to the next town." "I appreciate your concern," Camille said carefully, "but I think Bennett's different. They all seem different at first, dear. That's how they get you." The words stayed with Camille longer than she wanted to admit. That evening, when Bennett arrived with his usual smile and easy greeting, she found herself watching him more carefully, looking for signs that Mrs. Henderson might be right. But as the night wore on and they worked side by side, she couldn't find any evidence of deception. He was exactly who he appeared to be, a good man who'd lived a hard life and was trying to find a place to belong. "Something on your mind?" Bennett asked, catching her staring. "Mrs. Henderson says I shouldn't trust you." He didn't look surprised or offended. "She's probably right to worry. I've been a drifter for a long time. I've got no property, no real prospects beyond working other men's cattle. On paper, I'm exactly the kind of man a woman should avoid." "That's not a very convincing argument in your favor," Camille said, trying to keep her tone light even though her heart was beating faster. Bennett set down the candle he'd been working on and turned to face her fully. "The truth is, Camille, I've been waiting my whole life to find a reason to stop drifting. I think maybe I've found it. Maybe I've found her." He paused, his amber eyes intense. "But I understand if that's not enough. If you need me to prove myself somehow, to build something more substantial before you can trust me, then that's what I'll do. I just need to know if there's a chance, if there's something here worth fighting for." Camille felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such raw honesty and vulnerability. She thought about the past 2 months, about how her shop had transformed from a place of solitary labor into something warmer, how her days had begun to feel less like survival and more like living. She thought about the way Bennett looked at her, like she was someone remarkable instead of just someone to be pitied or taken advantage of. She thought about the loneliness that had defined her life since her father's death and how it had slowly, steadily receded in Bennett's presence. "There's something here," she said quietly. "I feel it too, but it scares me." "Scares me too," Bennett admitted. "I've never felt like this about anyone. I didn't even know I could feel like this. And yeah, that's terrifying because it means you could break my heart into 1,000 pieces. Or you could break mine. I won't. I swear to you, Camille, I won't." She wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being wanted to trust that this good, honest man would be different from every other person who'd left her behind. But trust was a hard-earned thing, especially in Bodie. "Show me," she said finally. "Not with words, but with time. Stay. Build something here. Let me see that you mean what you say." Bennett nodded slowly. "I can do that. I will do that." The next morning, he inquired about permanent work at the largest ranch outside Bodie. The owner, a gruff man named Samuel Chen who'd made his fortune in both mining and cattle, was initially skeptical about hiring a drifter for steady work. But Bennett showed up every day at dawn, worked harder than anyone else, and proved himself invaluable. Within 3 weeks, Samuel offered him a permanent position with wages that would allow him to save money, maybe even buy a small piece of land eventually. Bennett began to build a life in Bodie. He rented a small room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, much to that lady's surprise. He made friends with other ranch hands and townspeople. He attended church on Sundays, where Camille would see him sitting in the back pew, his hat respectfully removed, his attention focused on the sermon with genuine interest. And every evening, unless his work kept him late on the range, he'd appear at her shop, ready to help with whatever she needed. Their relationship deepened with each passing week. The touches became more frequent and lingered longer, his hand at the small of her back as they worked, her fingers brushing his as she handed him supplies, the way they'd stand close together while examining a particularly well-made candle. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, with wanting, with the careful dance of two people learning to trust. It was a cold November evening, with the first real snow of the season beginning to fall, when Bennett kissed her for the first time. They'd been cleaning up after finishing a large order for the Golden Eagle Saloon, and Camille had been laughing at something he'd said when she turned and found him looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough. Instead of answering, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape and taste of each other. Then Bennett's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and Camille melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt as the kiss deepened into something that spoke of months of longing and restraint finally being released. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bennett rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I know it might be too soon to say it, but I love you, Camille. I think I've loved you since that first night when I saw you working through the darkness, refusing to give up." Tears pricked at Camille's eyes. "I love you too. It terrifies me, but I do. Then we'll be terrified together." They held each other as the snow fell outside, the candles burning low around them, creating islands of warm light in the gathering darkness. Camille felt something unlock in her chest, some hard knot of fear and grief that had been there for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to be without it. In Bennett's arms, she finally understood what it meant to have a partner, someone who chose her not out of obligation or pity, but out of genuine love and respect. The winter that followed was the happiest Camille could remember. Despite the harsh weather and the challenges of keeping the shop running during the slower months, every day felt touched with grace. Bennett spent Christmas with her, bringing a small pine tree that they decorated with paper stars and strings of cranberries. He gave her a gift that made her cry, a beautiful set of candle molds he'd commissioned from the town's metalworker, each one etched with delicate flowers. "So you can make fancier candles," he explained, looking nervous about her reaction. "I thought maybe you could expand your business, offer something special for weddings and such." "They're perfect," she said, throwing her arms around his neck. "You're perfect." "Far from it," he said, holding her tight, "but I'm trying to be worthy of you." In February, Samuel Chen approached Bennett with an offer. One of his ranch hands was retiring and selling his small homestead, just 5 acres with a modest house, but enough space to run a few cattle or maybe farm a little. The price was reasonable, and Samuel offered to help with the financing if Bennett was interested. That evening, Bennett came to Camille's shop with barely contained excitement. "I can buy land," he said, the words tumbling out. "An actual piece of property. A house. Enough space to build something real." Camille's heart raced. "That's wonderful, Bennett. That's exactly what you wanted." He took her hands, his expression turning serious. "It's what we wanted, if you'll have me." He took a breath, then dropped to one knee right there in her workshop, still holding her hands, his eyes never leaving her face. "Camille Lancaster, I know I'm not much. I don't have a fortune or a fancy name or anything impressive to offer. But I have a heart that's completely yours and hands willing to work hard for our future and a love that gets stronger every single day. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me on that little piece of land? We could expand your candle shop, make it bigger and better. You could have a proper workspace, maybe take on an apprentice eventually, and we could have a home together, a real home. Say yes. Please say yes." Camille felt tears streaming down her face. She thought about the lonely nights working in her shop, about the exhaustion and fear that had been her constant companions for so long. She thought about how Bennett had changed everything, how he'd brought light into her darkness, just like his sunrise breakfast that first morning. She thought about the future he was offering, not as a rescue or a solution to her problems, but as a true partnership built on mutual respect and genuine love. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Bennett, I'll marry you." He stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her deeply while candles flickered around them like 1,000 tiny celebrations. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, Bennett produced a simple gold band from his pocket. "It was my grandmother's," he said, slipping it onto her finger. "The only thing I kept from Missouri. I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment, hoping you'd say yes." The ring fit perfectly, and Camille stared at it through her tears, overwhelmed by the reality of what had just happened. "I can't believe this is real." "Believe it," Bennett said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "This is the realest thing that's ever happened to me." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church, where Bennett had spent so many Sunday mornings. Camille wore a simple cream-colored dress that she'd sewn herself, with lace borrowed from Mrs. Henderson, who'd completely reversed her opinion of Bennett once his intentions became clear. The ceremony was attended by what felt like half of Bodie customers from the candle shop, Bennett's friends from the ranch, townspeople who'd watched their courtship with interest and approval. Samuel Chen stood up as Bennett's best man, and Mrs. Henderson served as Camille's attendant, dabbing at her eyes throughout the entire ceremony. When Bennett slipped a matching gold band onto her finger and kissed her as the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Camille felt as if her entire life had been leading to this moment. All the hardship, all the loneliness, all the exhausting nights working until her hands cramped, everything had been worth it to arrive here, married to this good man who loved her completely. The reception was held at the Golden Eagle Saloon, which had closed for the afternoon in honor of the occasion. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilariously inappropriate. Camille danced with her new husband until her feet hurt, then danced some more, too happy to care about the discomfort. Bennett held her close, whispering promises in her ear about their future, about the life they'd build together. As the sun began to set, they slipped away from the celebration and rode out to their new home. The small house looked almost magical in the fading light, smoke curling from the chimney because Bennett had come earlier to start a fire. He helped Camille down from the horse, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Got to do this properly," he said, carrying her across the threshold. Inside, the house was simple but clean, with furniture that had come with the property and a few items they'd purchased together. But what made Camille gasp was the bedroom, where Bennett had placed candles everywhere on the dresser, the windowsills, the small table beside the bed. He'd used the fancy molded candles she'd made with his Christmas gift, the ones with the flower designs. "I wanted you to see our first night together by candlelight," he said softly. "Seemed appropriate given how we met." Camille felt her eyes fill with tears again. You're going to make me cry through my entire wedding day. I hope they're happy tears. The happiest." That night, in the warm glow of candlelight, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that spoke of months of patient waiting. Bennett was gentle and careful with her, his hands reverent as they learned every curve and hollow of her body. Camille gave herself to him completely, without fear or reservation, trusting him with everything she was and everything she hoped to become. Their lovemaking was both innocent and profound, two people discovering together what it meant to be truly intimate, truly vulnerable, truly loved. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the soft bed, watching the candles burn low, neither wanting to sleep and miss a single moment of this perfect day. "Thank you," Bennett whispered against her hair. "For what? For saying yes. For trusting me. For being the bravest, strongest, most incredible woman I've ever known." Camille turned in his arms to face him. "Thank you for being patient, for proving yourself, for loving me enough to stay. I'll never leave you, Camille. That's a promise I'll keep until my last breath." The months that followed their wedding were filled with hard work, but also profound satisfaction. They worked together to expand the candle business, building a larger workshop on their property that allowed Camille to take on bigger orders. Bennett proved surprisingly good at the business side of things, negotiating with suppliers and customers, managing the books, and helping Camille organize her operations in ways that made everything more efficient. The business began to truly thrive, growing beyond just supplying Bodie to fulfilling orders from other towns in the region. At the same time, Bennett worked the small ranch, building their herd slowly but steadily. He'd wake before dawn to tend the cattle, then come in for breakfast with Camille before they'd both turn to the candle business. The days were long and exhausting, but they were together, building something that belonged to both of them. In the evenings, they'd sit on their small porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, talking about their dreams for the future. By the time summer arrived, Camille realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks but waited to be certain before telling Bennett. When she finally shared the news over dinner one evening, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He dropped his fork, stared at her in shock, then whooped with joy so loudly it startled their horses in the nearby pasture. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "We're going to have a baby," he kept repeating as if he couldn't quite believe it. "We're actually going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Camille asked, even though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. Camille, you've given me everything. A home, a purpose, love, and now a family. I don't have words for what this means to me." They spent the rest of the evening talking about names, about how they'd need to add a room to the house, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. Bennett was adamant that their child, whether boy or girl, would grow up knowing they were loved and valued, that they'd have opportunities he never had. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall. As Camille's belly grew, Bennett became almost comically protective, insisting she rest more and let him handle the heavier work in the shop. She tried to argue that she was pregnant, not fragile, but she secretly loved his attentiveness. He talked to her belly at night, telling their unborn child about the ranch, about the candle business, about how much they were already loved. In early November, on a cold night with snow threatening, Camille went into labor. Bennett rode at breakneck speed to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Peterson, a capable woman who delivered half the babies in Bodie. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Bennett refused to leave Camille's side except when the midwife insisted, holding her hand through every contraction. wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement and love. Their son was born just as the sun was rising, his first cries filling the small house with sound that felt like pure joy. Mrs. Peterson cleaned him and wrapped him in blankets before placing him in Camille's arms. She looked down at the tiny, red-faced baby and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. "He's perfect," she whispered. Bennett was crying openly, sitting on the edge of the bed and staring at his son with wonder. "Can I hold him?" Camille carefully transferred the baby to his father's arms. Bennett held his son like he was made of glass, his large, work-roughened hands infinitely gentle. The baby quieted, seeming to sense his father's presence. "Hello, little one," Bennett said softly. "Welcome to the world. I'm your papa, and that beautiful woman there is your mama, and we're going to love you so much. We're going to give you everything we never had. You're going to grow up safe and loved and happy, I promise you that." They named him Benjamin Lancaster Armstrong, honoring Bennett's name while giving him a fresh start, a new generation. Little Benjamin was a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. He had a good set of lungs on him, which he demonstrated frequently during those first exhausting weeks, but neither parent minded the sleepless nights. They'd pass him back and forth, taking turns walking him around the small house, singing to him, marveling at every tiny finger and toe. The candle business continued, though at a slower pace during those early months. Camille worked during Benjamin's naps, and Bennett had become skilled enough to handle many of the orders himself. Customers were understanding, often stopping by just to peek at the new baby and offer congratulations. Mrs. Henderson became a frequent visitor, claiming she was just checking on business but actually coming to hold Benjamin and coo over him like a proud grandmother. As Benjamin grew from a newborn to an infant who could smile and coo, the Armstrong household settled into new rhythms. Camille had never imagined she could be this happy, that life could be this full. She'd gone from being alone and exhausted, working through endless nights in her small shop, to being a wife and mother, a successful businesswoman with a partner who treated her as an equal, living on their own land with a future that seemed limitless. One evening in the spring, when Benjamin was 6 months old and learning to sit up on his own, Camille and Bennett sat on their porch watching him play with wooden blocks Bennett had carved. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. "Do you remember that first night I came to your shop?" Bennett asked, his arm around Camille's shoulders. "I thought you were going to rob me," she admitted with a laugh. "And I thought you were the most determined, impressive woman I'd ever seen. You looked so tired but so fierce, like you were fighting off the whole world with nothing but candles and willpower." "I was fighting off the whole world, or at least my small corner of it. And you won." Bennett pulled her closer. "Look at what you've built, Camille, what we've built together. A thriving business, this homestead, our son. You could have sent me away that night. You could have decided I wasn't worth the risk. But you gave me a chance, and it changed my entire life." Camille reached up to touch his face, this man who'd kept every promise, who'd brought sunrise into her darkness. "You changed mine, too. I was drowning in loneliness and work, convinced that was all life would ever be. Then you showed up asking for candles and offering breakfast, and suddenly everything was different." "I knew that morning," Bennett said quietly. "When I brought you sunrise and you said yes to breakfast, I knew you were going to be my wife. I didn't know how or when, but I knew. My heart knew." "That's ridiculous." "Maybe, but it's true." He kissed her temple. "Best decision I ever made, buying candles at 3 in the morning." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, their son babbling happily nearby, the cattle lowing softly in the pasture, the smell of beeswax drifting from the workshop. This was home, Camille thought. This imperfect, beautiful, hard-won life they'd created together. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The candle business continued to grow, eventually requiring them to hire 2 apprentices to keep up with demand. Bennett's small herd expanded as he proved himself an excellent rancher, with Samuel Chen becoming not just an employer but a close friend and mentor. They added 2 more rooms to their house, anticipating more children. When Benjamin was 2, Camille became pregnant again. This time she carried the baby more easily, her body knowing what to expect. On a warm July evening, she gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, after Camille's mother. Clara came into the world with a full head of blonde hair and lungs even stronger than her brother's had been. Benjamin was initially suspicious of this small, noisy creature who took up so much of his parents' attention. But he quickly became a devoted big brother, always wanting to help feed her or rock her cradle. 2 years after Clara came another son, David, who was quiet and thoughtful from birth, so different from his more boisterous siblings. The house was constantly full of noise and activity, with children running through the rooms, climbing on furniture, helping their mother make candles or following their father around the ranch. It was chaotic and exhausting and more wonderful than Camille could have imagined. Bennett was an exceptional father, patient and playful, teaching his children to ride and rope and care for animals, but also encouraging their education and creativity. He'd read to them every night, fantastic stories of adventure and heroism, different voices for each character until the children were laughing too hard to sleep. He taught Benjamin and David to work with their hands, to take pride in a job well done. He taught Clara that girls could do everything boys could, encouraging her tomboyish nature, while Camille taught her the candle-making trade. The candle shop became something of a family business, with even young Benjamin learning to dip tapers under his mother's watchful eye. He had a knack for it, his small hands steady and patient. Clara, on the other hand, preferred the more creative aspects, designing new molds and experimenting with colored waxes. David was content to keep the books and organize supplies, his methodical nature perfect for such tasks. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Bennett surprised Camille with a trip to Sacramento, just the 2 of them, leaving the children with Mrs. Henderson for a week. It was the first time they'd been alone together for more than a few hours since Benjamin's birth, and they reveled in the freedom. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate in restaurants, walked through the city holding hands like newlyweds. But what moved Camille most was when Bennett took her to the cemetery where her parents were buried, standing beside her as she told them about her life, about their grandchildren, about the happiness she'd found. "I wish they could have met you," she said, leaning against Bennett's solid presence. "I wish I could have met them too, to thank them for raising such an incredible woman. They'd have loved you, my father especially. He always said a man should be judged by his actions, not his words. You would have impressed him." They returned to Bodie refreshed and even more in love, if that was possible. Their children had missed them terribly, but had behaved well for Mrs. Henderson, who declared them the finest children in California, though everyone suspected she was biased. As the children grew older, the Armstrong homestead became a gathering place for the community. Camille and Bennett had a reputation for hospitality, always welcoming neighbors for meals or celebrations. Their anniversary parties became legendary, with half the town showing up to celebrate the couple who'd proven that true love could flourish even in the harsh landscape of Bodie. Bennett continued to work for Samuel Chen, but also served on the town council, using his position to advocate for better schools and safer streets. Camille expanded her business beyond candles, training other women in the trade and helping them start their own small enterprises. She became known as someone who lifted others up, who believed women could be more than just wives and mothers, though she treasured those roles too. When Benjamin turned 16, tall and strong like his father with his mother's business sense, he announced he wanted to expand the ranch operations, to breed horses as well as cattle. Bennett helped him start the venture, proud of his son's ambition, but insisting he learn every aspect of the business from the ground up. Clara, at 14, had already begun designing candles that were works of art, selling them at premium prices to wealthy families throughout California. David, at 12, had taken over all the bookkeeping for both the ranch and the candle business, his mind sharp with numbers. One evening, as Camille and Bennett watched their children working together on a particularly complex order, arguing and laughing in equal measure, Bennett pulled his wife close. "Can you believe we made all this?" he asked, gesturing to the bustling scene before them. "Sometimes it doesn't seem real," Camille admitted. "When I think about where I was before you knocked on my door that night, working alone in that small shop, so tired I could barely see straight, never imagining I could have this." "I knew," Bennett said. "The moment I saw you, surrounded by all those candles, your hands moving so surely even though you were exhausted, I knew I wanted to spend my life with you. Took me a while to convince you, though." Camille laughed. "You were very persistent. Best quality I have." He kissed her forehead. "That and excellent taste in women. Just women, plural, woman, singular. Only you, Camille, always only you." The years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable challenges of life but also countless joys. They dealt with droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and business setbacks, the normal trials of raising children and running multiple enterprises. But they faced everything together, their partnership grown only stronger with time. Benjamin married a sweet girl named Sarah when he was 22, and they built a house on the edge of the Armstrong property, expanding the family holdings. Within a year, they had a daughter, making Camille and Bennett grandparents for the first time. Holding her granddaughter, Camille was struck by the strange circularity of life, by how far she'd come from that lonely young woman working through the nights. Clara, to everyone's surprise except Bennett's, left Bodie at 18 to study art in San Francisco, though she promised to return. She had her father's adventurous spirit and her mother's determination, and they supported her even as they missed her terribly. David stayed close to home, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operations of both businesses as Camille and Bennett began to slow down. On their 25th anniversary, Bennett organized a massive celebration. Everyone they'd known over the past 2.5 decades came: friends, customers, business associates, their children and grandchildren. Even Clara made the journey from San Francisco, bringing with her a young man she was clearly in love with. The party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and speeches that made everyone laugh and cry. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Camille and Bennett found themselves alone on their porch, the same porch where they'd spent countless evenings watching sunsets and planning their future. The house behind them was quiet now, their children either gone to their own homes or sleeping in their old rooms. 25 years, Camille said wonderingly. "How did we get so old? We're not old. We're distinguished." Bennett pulled her close, his arm still strong despite the silver threading through his dark hair. "Though I suppose I can't call you a girl anymore. You can call me whatever you want as long as you keep calling me. I'll call you the love of my life, the woman who saved me from wandering." The best partner, wife, mother, and friend a man could ask for. Camille felt tears sting her eyes, even after all these years, still moved by his words. You know what I remember most about that first night? Not how tired I was, or how startled I was by someone knocking at that hour. I remember how you looked at me, like I was doing something remarkable instead of just surviving. No one had looked at me like that in so long. It made me feel seen. You were doing something remarkable. You still are. Bennett tilted her face up to his. Every day with you is a gift, Camille. I knew it then, and I know it now. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. She kissed him then, as sweetly as she had in her shop all those years ago when he'd asked permission, as passionately as on their wedding night, as comfortably as only people who'd spent decades learning each other could. When they broke apart, both were smiling. Should we go inside? Bennett asked. In a minute. I want to look at the stars a little longer. They stood together on their porch, wrapped in each other's arms, looking up at the vast California sky. Somewhere in the house behind them, a candle still burned in the window, a habit Camille had never broken. It had become her signature, that light always burning, a beacon of welcome and warmth. People said you could find your way to the Armstrong place even on the darkest nights because there was always a light waiting, and there always would be, Camille thought. As long as she and Bennett were together, there would be light and warmth and love. He'd brought her sunrise on a cold morning 25 years ago, and every day since had been brighter for his presence in her life. She'd worked through the night alone for so long, never imagining that someone could love her the way Bennett did, could partner with her so completely. But he had found her. He'd knocked on her door asking for candles, and she'd let him in, and everything had changed. It was the best decision she'd ever made, opening that door. The best risk she'd ever taken, trusting him with her heart. "What are you thinking?" Bennett asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "That I love you, that I'd choose you again in every lifetime. Only every lifetime. I was hoping for every dimension too." She laughed, poking him gently in the ribs. "Greedy. When it comes to you, absolutely." They finally went inside, blowing out most of the candles but leaving one burning in the window as always. In their bedroom, they undressed slowly, comfortably, knowing each other's bodies as well as their own after 25 years of marriage. They made love with the easy passion of long familiarity, then fell asleep wrapped around each other, the candle burning steadily in the window like a small, eternal flame. The years continued their steady march. More grandchildren arrived, adding to the chaos and joy of family gatherings. The businesses continued to thrive, eventually expanding beyond anything Camille had imagined in those early days. The ranch grew to encompass over 50 acres, with Benjamin managing the horse breeding operation and David overseeing the cattle and business affairs. The candle enterprise became legendary throughout California, known for both quality and artistry. Clara returned from San Francisco with her husband, an artist named Michael, and opened a gallery in Bodie that featured her candle sculptures and his paintings. The town had grown and civilized somewhat over the decades, no longer quite so wild but still maintaining its frontier spirit. The Armstrongs were considered founding families, their success and stability a testament to what was possible with hard work and determination. Camille and Bennett gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of their various enterprises, spending more time with their grandchildren and each other. They'd earned their rest, everyone agreed, though they were both still sharp and active well into their 60s. Bennett still rode out to check on the cattle most mornings, and Camille still made special candles for important occasions, her hands steady despite the arthritis that had begun to creep into her joints. On their 40th anniversary, their children and grandchildren organized a surprise celebration. The entire town turned out, it seemed, to honor the couple who'd become something of a local legend. The mayor gave a speech about their contributions to Bodie, about how they'd helped transform it from a rough mining town into a real community. Their grandchildren performed a play they'd written about the night Bennett had knocked on Camille's door, which was both touching and hilarious, getting several details comically wrong. But the best part came at the end, when Benjamin stood up to speak. He was a man of 42 now, with children of his own, but he looked at his parents with the same adoration he'd had as a boy. "Growing up," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room, "I thought every family was like ours. I thought every father looked at his wife the way my father looks at my mother, like she hung the moon and stars. I thought every mother trusted and respected her husband the way my mother does my father. I thought all married people were partners, friends, lovers, all wrapped into one. It wasn't until I got older that I realized how rare what my parents have is, how special." He paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. "They've shown all of us what love looks like, not the easy, romantic love of storybooks, but real love, the kind that works through exhaustion and setbacks. The kind that builds businesses and raises children and creates homes. The kind that lasts 40 years and still looks at each other like it's the first day." He raised his glass. "To Bennett and Camille Armstrong, the best parents, the best example, the best love story I've ever known." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Camille was crying openly, and Bennett wasn't far behind. They stood and embraced their son, then all their children, then tried to hug all their grandchildren at once, which resulted in a pile of people laughing and crying together. Later that night, back at home in the quiet of their bedroom, Camille sat at her dressing table while Bennett helped her remove the pins from her hair. It had gone completely white, though it was still thick and long. He ran his fingers through it gently, a nightly ritual they'd maintained for 4 decades. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "That night when you bought candles from a suspicious woman who thought you might be dangerous, did you imagine all of this?" "I imagined hoping," Bennett said. "I imagined wanting. I imagined that maybe, just maybe, if I was very lucky and very persistent, you might give me a chance." He set down the hairbrush and put his hands on her shoulders. "But this, a lifetime of love, children and grandchildren. Building something that will outlast us both. No, I didn't imagine this. This is better than anything I could have dreamed." Camille reached up to cover his hands with her own. In the mirror, she could see them both, old now, their faces lined with years and weather and laughter. But when she looked at Bennett, she still saw the young cowboy who'd knocked on her door, hat in hand, asking politely for candles. And when he looked at her, she knew he still saw the determined young woman working through the night, refusing to surrender to loneliness and hardship. "I love you," she said simply. "After everything, through everything, that's what remains. I love you. And I love you, until my last breath, Camille, until my very last breath." They climbed into bed, the same bed where they'd spent their wedding night, where their children had been conceived, where they'd comforted each other through sorrows and celebrated joys. A candle burned in the window, as it always did, as it always would. The flame flickered slightly in the night breeze but never went out, steady and true, like the love that had sustained them for 40 years. Camille fell asleep in her husband's arms, as she had almost every night since their marriage, safe and loved and home. Outside, the stars wheeled through their ancient patterns. The cattle settled in the pastures. The town of Bodie slept. And in the Armstrong house, a candle burned in the window, its light spreading out into the darkness, a beacon of warmth and welcome and enduring love. The years continued to be kind to them. They celebrated their 50th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, their family tree having grown large and strong. The businesses they'd built continued to thrive under the management of their children and grandchildren, the Armstrong name synonymous with quality and integrity. Bennett remained active well into his 70s, still riding out to check on the ranch most days, though he'd finally accepted that he needed to leave the heavy work to younger men. Camille still made candles for special occasions, her arthritic hands slower but still skilled, each piece a work of art created with decades of experience. They'd become something of an institution in Bodie, the old couple who'd loved each other so completely for so long. Young couples just starting out would come to them for advice. Struggling marriages sought their counsel. They shared what they'd learned freely, that love was work, but work that paid dividends every day. That respect and partnership mattered as much as passion. That choosing each other, every day, through good times and bad, was what created a lasting union. One autumn evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset as they'd done thousands of times before, Bennett took Camille's hand in his. His grip was still strong, despite the years, and the simple gesture filled her with the same warmth it always had. "You remember," he said softly, "that first morning when I brought you breakfast. You were so surprised that I'd actually come back." "I'd convinced myself you'd forgotten all about me," Camille admitted, "that it was just something you'd said in the moment. I could never forget you. From that very first night, you were seared into my heart." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "Best purchase I ever made, those candles. Best sale I ever made, letting you through that door." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold, the same colors that had marked their evenings together for over 5 decades. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and well-tended. In the distance, they could see lights coming on in Benjamin's house, where their grandchildren were likely sitting down to dinner. Clara's gallery glowed softly in the town below. David's house, built next to theirs when he married, showed warm light through its windows. Everything they'd built together, everything they'd created, was still there, still thriving. They'd started with nothing but hope and determination and love, and they'd built an empire of family and business and community. But more than any of that, they'd built a life together, and that was the greatest achievement of all. As the stars began to appear, Camille leaned her head on Bennett's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the solid warmth of him beside her. After all these years, after all they'd been through together, his presence still felt like home. He was still her sunrise, chasing away the darkness, filling her life with light. "I'd do it all again," she said quietly. "Every hard day, every challenge, every moment of doubt, I'd do it all again to end up here with you." Bennett kissed the top of her head. "Me too. Every single moment." They stayed there until the stars filled the sky and the night grew cold, reluctant to end even one of their precious evenings together. When they finally went inside, Camille lit their candle in the window, the same ritual she'd performed every night for decades. The flame caught and held, burning bright and steady, a testament to love that had endured, to promises kept, to a life built on trust and partnership and unwavering devotion. In their bedroom, they prepared for sleep with the ease of long practice, moving around each other in the dark with perfect coordination. They climbed into bed, and Bennett pulled Camille close, her back against his chest, his arm draped over her waist. It was how they always slept, 2 pieces fitted perfectly together. "Good night, my love," Bennett whispered. "Good night," Camille replied, already drifting toward sleep, safe and warm and completely at peace. The candle in the window burned through the night, as it always did, a small but steady flame pushing back against the darkness. It would still be burning when the sun rose, when a new day began, when Bennett and Camille woke to another morning together. Another day of the life they'd built. Another chapter in a love story that had spanned more than 50 years. And it would keep burning, night after night, year after year, for as long as they lived. A promise made in wax and flame. A beacon of hope and love and perseverance. A reminder that on a cold night long ago, a candle maker worked through the darkness, and a cowboy brought her sunrise and a marriage proposal, and everything changed. Their love had lit up not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. Their children had learned what commitment meant. Their grandchildren understood the value of partnership. Their community had witnessed what it looked like when two people truly chose each other, day after day, year after year, through everything life threw at them. The candle burned, the stars wheeled overhead, and in their bed, Bennett and Camille Armstrong slept peacefully, their hands intertwined even in sleep, bound together by love that had proven stronger than loneliness, hardship, doubt, and time itself. It was a love that would endure until their last days, and beyond that in the legacy they'd created, the family they'd raised, the lives they'd touched. It was, in the end, the greatest story Bodie had ever known. Not a story of gold strikes or gunfights, or the wild frontier adventures that filled dime novels, but a story of two people who found each other in the darkness, who built a life together with nothing but love and determination, who proved that the most extraordinary adventures were the ones lived quietly, faithfully, day by day, in partnership with the person who held your heart. The candle burned on, a small flame in a vast darkness, constant and true and impossibly bright.